I want to talk to you today about an article that was published recently on the Gospel Coalition, written by a sociologist named George Yancey. Now, Dr. Yancey has been studying the differences between progressive Christians and conservative Christians for several years, and actually the findings of his research will be published in a book coming out this summer, and that book is going to be called One Faith No Longer: The Transformation of Christianity in Red and Blue America. And as far as I understand, he's taking a look at the differences between these two groups from a theological angle and also a political angle. Now, this article that was published on the Gospel Coalition is very interesting to me because it analyzes the beliefs from a more political perspective. Now, in defining these two different categories, Dr. Yancey describes conservative Christians as those who believe that the Bible is God's inerrant word and that Jesus is the only path to salvation. On the other hand, he identifies progressive Christians as those who do not believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God or that Jesus is the only path to salvation. The article points out that lately there's been a lot of criticism over the political entanglements of conservative Christians. Conservative Christians have been under fire lately for their political activism, but this article points out that progressive Christians are not without their political entanglements as well. In fact, one of the findings of the study is that progressive Christians actually prioritize political values more than conservative Christians do. And also that political conformity is more important for progressive Christians than it is for conservative Christians. Dr. Yancey lays out 3 reasons why he believes progressive Christians are actually more political than conservative Christians. And the first reason is different frameworks. So progressive Christians and conservative Christians are operating from completely different value systems. He points out that values like inclusion and tolerance and social justice are linked to humanistic values that are usually found among highly educated political progressives, and this would be regardless of whether or not they're Christians. So for progressive Christians, those values are at the foundation of how they understand reality and even approach questions such as meaning. Whereas for conservative Christians, the way they approach reality and those deep questions of meaning are largely going to be informed by the Bible, specifically a historical biblical interpretation. The second reason he gives for why he thinks progressive Christians are more political than conservative Christians is that they have different images of Jesus. Progressive Christians tend to focus on the actions and the teachings of Jesus that reinforce their values of tolerance and inclusion, which they see as examples of love. Whereas for conservative Christians, Jesus is interpreted through that historical biblical framework. And so they have less of a problem seeing this Jesus that might be a little more intolerant at times, even excluding people from salvation. The third reason he gives for why he thinks progressive Christians are more political than conservative Christians is that there's a very different view of the Bible between the two groups. Progressive Christians tend to not see the Bible as the inerrant word of God, but rather as a book of wisdom, and they question traditional interpretations of the scriptures, whereas conservative Christians tend to view the Bible as the inerrant word of God and authoritative for their lives. Another finding of the study is that conservative Christians are more likely to create sort of out-groups based on theology rather than politics, whereas progressive Christians are more likely to create out-groups based on politics rather than theology. Progressive Christians are more likely to accept non-Christians, which is a part of their values of tolerance and inclusion. Except the article notes this, and this is a very interesting quote. It says, such tolerance, however, does not extend to conservative Christians, whom they see as not practicing the inclusion they so highly value. Progressive Christians are less likely than conservative Christians to have different types of believers and friends. Progressive Christians are more likely to reject conservative Christians than conservative Christians are to reject progressive Christians. Progressive Christians envision conservative Christians as barriers to the type of inclusion and tolerance they want in society. Toward the end of the article, Dr. Yancey points out that many people have rightly criticized the entanglement of conservative Christians with politics. But then he goes on to note that progressive Christians stress political values more than conservative Christians, yet there is less criticism of their activism. He closes out the article by saying that at the very least we should dispense with the stereotype that it's only conservative Christians who impose their faith on politics.